Hi folks, Will from MinIO here, and in this module, we're going to show you how to use the AIStor Load Balancer, which is part of the AIStor Enterprise platform. In this module, we're going to show you what the load balancer actually is, what it does. We're going to talk about how to deploy the load balancer, and then we're going to talk about designing access rules. We'll also have a demonstration about all of this stuff at the end. And at the end of this module, you should be able to describe all of the features of the AIStor Load Balancer. You should also be able to deploy the load balancer with an object store. Both the load balancer and object store, they get deployed in tandem as a sidecar. You should also be able to route object store traffic through the load balancer. That's very important to do. We'll show you that in the demo. You'll also be able to limit your upload and download bandwidth on a bucket and allow anonymous access on a bucket. Let's go ahead and dive into AIStor Load Balancer. So the big question is, what is the load balancer? Well, the load balancer is both a load balancer and a firewall. It is designed to work with an object store. That means that it is very focused on buckets and objects. The AIStor load balancer can be used to allow or deny anonymous access to buckets or prefixes on an object store. You can throttle access by bandwidth or rate of requests, which is also very interesting. For either anonymous or authenticated users, you can also load balance across multiple object store servers. You can even set up anonymous access for your entire deployment as a global anonymous access. So all of these things are handled by this load balancer tool. Each load balancer process is going to be independent, and it runs as a sidecar with its corresponding object store. So if I have 8 object stores running in my deployment, I'm going to have 8 of these sidecar load balancer processes running as well. The load balancers are all going to talk to each other to make sure that they're routing traffic to the right places, and as many load balancers as needed can run to accept the requests. Because it is so lightweight, it doesn't really have a huge impact on the system. It just allows you to control all of your access very simply, very easily. So how do we go ahead and deploy this AIStor load balancer? Well, the thing is, again, it's very lightweight. So every time I deploy an object store, I'm going to have an instance for each object store. So each object store instance is going to have its own load balancer instance. What this means is that the work is going to be distributed evenly across the deployment. Each of your rules are created at the bucket level, so keep that in mind. This is very, very focused on bucket level access rules. It is going to replace direct access to the nodes through the AIStor itself. So generally speaking, when you deploy an object store, you're going to set up direct access. You're going to expose a node port or whatever it is that you're going to do. To expose that node port to direct access to the object store means that everything is going straight to the object store. What you want to do when you deploy a load balancer is change that endpoint so that the endpoint is now the load balancer, and then the load balancer will do all the forwarding into the nodes. Now, the important thing is that the load balancer has to exist alongside an object store. So if you haven't deployed an object store, you can't deploy the load balancer. On the object store dashboard itself, you're going to look at the network icon. We'll take a look at that in our demo. And then each object store deployment is going to have its own load balancer. I know I've said that a number of times. It's very important to keep that in mind. Once you've set up your load balancer, your object store has to be configured to expose the ports via the load balancer. Again, you're going to look for the traffic cone icon in that case. We'll show you that in the demo. The load balancer itself can be engaged even if no rules have been deployed. So this allows for the load balancing features, and then you can add the limits and the rules later should you want to. Okay, so now that we've got our load balancer set up, we want to design some access rules. So here's what we need to keep in mind about designing an access rule. It is always associated with a bucket. The access rules do not exist in a vacuum. They have to be associated with a bucket. This allows for very fine-grained access control. You can completely deny access to a bucket via the load balancer. You can set an overall upload and download limit across that bucket. You can enable or disable anonymous access just for that bucket. And also, you can set detailed per action API limits. Now, this is important. The API calls that we're talking about the S3 API calls, and there's a number of them that you can use. Probably the most common one you would think about would be a get object, right? So the S3 get object API call. When you do per action API limits, it's not bandwidth anymore, right? It's not a megabits per second, okay? Now it's number of requests per second. So I can limit the number of get requests, for instance, to my bucket using these API limits. There are a lot of different S3 API calls you can make. There's also a couple of specific MinIO API calls that you can limit using this. There's a complete list of details in a link here at the bottom of this video. The load balancer can also be used to set up anonymous access for the entire deployment. That means every bucket in your deployment. You have to have at least one bucket specific rule in order to enable this through the UI though. Take care if you are enabling anonymous access in production like this. It may be better to simply allow anonymous access on a per bucket basis, but you have the ability should you want to. Next up, we're going to do a little demo video. We're going to show you a lot of these features of the load balancer. If you'd like to reach out with us, you can connect with us on Slack at slack.min.io, or you can just leave a comment here on the video. Thanks, and we'll see you for the next one.